As fantastic a CFP as Mel O is, and as wonderful an attorney as I am, please do note that anything said in our show are our opinions alone and are not meant to be taken as financial or legal advice.
Welcome to Finances, the Other F Word, a Gen Xer podcast for musicians and music lovers, where we discuss money and music without all the pretentious bullshit. Here are your hosts, Zoe Terry, attorney at large, and Mel O, certified financial planner and author of Finances, the Other F Word. Listener discretion is advised.
Hey guys, welcome to Finances, the Other F Word. Zoe is still out as she continues to recover from her knee surgery. And hopefully we will have her back soon, but I have a couple really good episodes lined up in her absence while we give her time to recover. And today on the show, I wanted to talk about the labor shortage. And so for those of you who are watching this on YouTube, you noticed my air quotes, but for those of you who didn't, trust me, they're there, because everywhere you go, you seem to see that there is now hiring signs. You drive down the street, they're everywhere. And so I really wanted to look into this and see how we were recovering or not recovering after COVID, and kind of some of the movements that are going on in the economy in general. So let's start with some basic facts, okay? The economy created 194,000 jobs in September. And just to put this in context, the Wall Street Journal had forecast that it would add 500,000 jobs in September. The private sector added the most jobs at the fastest rate, but we saw that there was a fall in local employment from state and local governments. For Blacks in America, their jobless rate dropped a little bit to end at about 7.9%, which is still rather high, obviously considerably higher as compared to whites in America. The labor force actually shrank by 183,000 jobs in September, which again, if you're driving around and you're seeing all the help wanted signs, you might think that that is a little hard to believe. The percentage of people working in the labor force in America fell to 61.6%, which is still 2% lower than we were at before the pandemic. Now, this equates to approximately 6 million people in the United States who are not currently in the labor force due to a variety of reasons, which we're going to discuss here in a moment as we deep dive into this topic. Now, we see that the white collar space added the most jobs at about 60,000, while retail space added it at 56,000, and about 4,000 was added to transportation companies to deliver goods. And then we saw a modest increase in manufacturing and construction. And all of this stuff is going to come back later and be important. Now, according to the Consumer Price Index, which is the CPI, which we've addressed multiple times on this show, that is a number that tracks the average change of prices over time of a basket of goods and services. And we see that that has jumped to 5.3% year over year. Now, Americans in general are working more overtime to cover the jobs that are vacant. And we see now that the average American works 34.8 hours a week, which is considerably higher than before the pandemic, as the locations who are in job deficiencies are trying to find ways to cover shifts. There is a lot of overtime in retail, as you would expect, and the retail sector makes up 58.1% of the U.S. workforce as of 2019, according to the Bureau of Labor and Statistics. When we started to get into this, I got to tell you, as a person who really wants to help close the gap between the 99% and the 1%, there's part of me that was so excited when I started digging into this topic to see how the 99% was starting to put the 1% a little bit on their heels as far as being able to have the upper hand when it comes to job and employment negotiations. And as exciting as all of that sounds, we'll see that there's still a whole bunch of other obstacles that are working against people who are trying to get into the labor market. Now, most of the extra unemployment benefits ended September 6th. So let's start with a couple stories so you guys can understand why I decided that I wanted to cover this topic. I went to Burger King the other day and it was, noon, and I'm not a big fast food eater, but I wanted Burger King. Their dining room was closed. Their drive-through was backed all the way out. And of course, their dining room was closed because of the fact that there was not enough employees to keep both of them open. Then I had a friend who was in the Wendy's drive-through, and he was probably about the eighth car back, and somebody came out and started talking to each car and basically told them all, hey, we're closing because we don't have enough staff to even keep the drive-through open. The dining room is already closed. We can't even keep it open for drive-through. So we're literally closing the Wendy's. So they closed the Wendy's in the middle of everybody's lunch break and everybody that was in the drive-through trying to grab food. And this movement that we're experiencing in America, and I'm sure worldwide, is being dubbed as the Great Resignation. And there's a whole bunch of reasons for that. And this is hitting sectors all the way across the globe. I was on hold with Fidelity yesterday for an hour and 50 fucking minutes because I could not get an answer to a question. I was trying to chat with Fidelity at the same time I was actually on hold for Fidelity. When they finally picked up the phone at an hour and 50 minutes, they fucking hung up on me. Now, anytime you call an investment firm, you would expect that you're going to have some type of delays in answering, but an hour and 50 fucking minutes on hold with Fidelity is absolutely unacceptable. And then to be hung up on, needless to say, I lost my shit. So we're seeing this across multiple sectors. This is not just, in the fast food space or the retail space. And so this is giving this impression that we have this giant labor shortage. But as I started researching, you'll find out that that's not really always the situation. There has been multiple conversations that I've had with my clients where they have said, things to the effect that people just don't want to work. And soon as the federal employment benefits end, then there's going to be this flood of applications and everybody's going to be running back into workforce. And then all of a sudden, these people who couldn't find jobs are going to be able to find jobs. And to be honest with you, I agreed with that. And I did think that after the benefits, the federal benefits, the increased federal benefits on unemployment ended, that we would see a massive return to the workforce. And quite frankly, it's not happening. And so there's a couple reasons for that. And what happens is as these people are resigning from their positions, specifically in like the leisure and hospitality sectors, which is kind of amazing because the hospitality and leisure section has been leading the recovery out of COVID, as you would expect. And what we're seeing that people, as they're resigning, that they're actually pushing hourly wages up because the different sectors are trying to lure the people back, and they're trying to do it by increasing wages. Is that going to be enough? Probably not. So let's look at it. Let's talk about the customer is always right policy. And I thought this was fascinating. This is one of those gems that when I'm researching this stuff for you guys and researching this stuff for me, that I come across things and I'm like, oh, fuck yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so check it out. We have, for as long as I can remember in my years on this planet, we have been told that the customer is always right, that you need to do what the customer needs. And basically it's given us free reign to kind of just be complete and utter dicks and assholes, if we're being completely real with it. And so what we've seen a lot of the retail locations, these employees who are considered low wage hourly employees are getting stuck having to enforce mandates for wearing masks, which is fucking ridiculous. And if you've been to Home Depot, if you've been to Walmart, if you've been to any of those big locations like that, there's a person stationed out in front, usually a younger person, and they have, hand sanitizer and they have masks, and they put, a 21, 22-year-old girl in front of Home Depot and expect her to tell people coming in the door that they need to wear fucking masks for basically no money. And you can take this across the board anywhere, Target, Walmart, whatever. And so we're seeing that this is one of the things that is starting to push people away, thus getting us wrapped in the Great Resignation. And there is a couple examples of how dangerous that this can actually be. In May of last year, a security guard at Family Dollar and Family Dollar, Dollar General, Dollar Tree is going to come up a lot in this. And I actually have a personal story about that I'll share later, that you're going to find was shot and killed when he tried to stop a customer from coming into the store because the daughter of the customer wasn't wearing a mask. Now, fucking think about that for a minute. How ludicrous is that? Your fucking daughter is not wearing a mask, and so they won't let you in the store, and so your result is to shoot and kill somebody? Are you fucking ridiculous? How traumatizing is that for the kid? And how much of a big asshole are you? And I fucking hope they put you under the jail or put you under capital punishment, which we haven't talked about on this show yet, but we will get there. And Zoe is a major proponent against capital punishment, and I am not, needless to say. So that will be a fun episode when we get there. So again, May of last year, a security guard at Family Dollar was shot and killed in Michigan because he refused to let somebody come in the store because their daughter wasn't wearing a mask. Now think about that for a minute. You're talking about a low wage earner at the Family Dollar store. 9 times out of 10, you know that he did not have life insurance. So that left a lasting financial impact on his family. Do you think that whatever amount of money he was making at the time was fucking worth that? Absolutely not. I mean, this is ludicrous. Then we had a grocery store cashier in Atlanta who was shot dead following another mass dispute. Okay. So they are a fucking grocery store cashier that is being expected to enforce policies for a fucking corporation who's making a fuck ton of money on the backs of their hourly wage employees, and they fucking end up dead for it. So let me tell you guys a story. We covered this in our Wells Fargo scandal episode, and it's public knowledge. I used to work for Wells Fargo Bank back in the day, and I worked for Wells Fargo Investments back in the day as well. And at the time, we had started seeing bulletproof glass going up in front of the tellers. And with that, what ended up happening is that the procedures of a takeover robbery had changed. So what typically happens in a takeover robbery back in the day was somebody comes in with a gun, jumps up on the counter like you see in the movies, everybody down, this is a robbery, and they steal everybody. That's a takeover. They take over the whole branch. Well, then what we saw is we saw the cashiers, all the tellers started having this bullet reflective glass that came up and was all the way across. And what it had been before the bullet reflective glass was that if somebody comes in and they want to take steal money from you, you just give them the money. You just give them the money because everybody's safety is more important. And that was it. Well, as soon as this protective glass came up, all of a sudden it changed. And what tellers were expected to do, and I shit you not, is if I'm a teller behind bulletproof glass and somebody comes in and passes me a note or flashes me a gun or does whatever and says, hey, this is a robbery. Or like I said, a lot of times you just pass a note, I have a gun. This is a robbery. Give me all the money and chill. They were to scream out loud down the teller line, we're being robbed, hit the silent alarm, and then duck under their cashier. They're under their little cubby area where they were standing. And then all of the other cashiers, all the other tellers that were behind the teller line were expected to do the same thing. So you might think, okay, what's wrong with that? Well, the fucking problem is that all the fucking bankers are exposed in the branch. So let's say if you do have somebody who comes in who does truly have a gun and is really not fucking playing, the teller screams, we're being robbed, they got a gun. Okay, you would expect, according to Wells Fargo, the expectation was, oh, they'll just run away. Well, what if they get pissed and there's all these nice hostages walking around and clients walking around that are sitting at various desks getting help by bankers? And so I remember at the time going, are you fucking serious? You're telling me that your profit is more important than my life, instead of just giving these bastards the money that they need. And this is way back, you guys. This is like 2006, 7. I'm talking way back in the day. And this is just an example of a lot of the policies that are starting to come to a spearhead that we're seeing right now that I'm hoping will start changing under the wave of the Great Resignation. So last week or a couple weeks ago, we saw tourists were captured on video attacking a hostess in a New York City restaurant, which I believe the restaurant was called Carmine's, after she asked for proof of vaccination, which was per the regulations. And I can't remember if it was New York regulations or if it was just the restaurant's regulations. She asked for the vaccination cards and they attacked her tourists. Now, I don't know where the tourists are from. What we're seeing a lot, and I'm going to do an episode on this and it's going to be fucking great, is on the Karen movement. And we're seeing that, and I'm a white woman, if you can't tell, or if you haven't seen me on YouTube or haven't been to the website, by the way, go to all those places. I am a white woman, and there is the Karen epidemic, the Karen movement that has been running through, that we're going to talk about where the origins of that came from. And what we see is we see a lot of these customers, and the customers always right bullshit has started to entitle people to be absolute and utter fucktards. And we're seeing this spread through industries for so long, but now people are like, man, fuck you, I've had enough. So there was a poll that was done earlier this year, and 80% of workers said that they had experienced hostile behavior from customers who didn't want to follow safety protocols, and 39% of them said they were leaving their jobs because of it. So again, we're seeing a disconnect between, oh, we have a labor shortage. Well, we don't have a labor shortage. We have some policies that are in place that are, which we're going to get into more in a minute, which are ridiculous and ludicrous for workers. Now, there's also mismatches going on. So we have skill levels. So just because we have somebody who, say, leaves a Dollar General because they're like, fuck this, working here is not, you're not paying me enough to put myself in this position, doesn't mean that they can just automatically leap into another position, because there needs to be training that needs to be done. Maybe they need to pick up more computer skills. Maybe they need to actually learn a trade like laying flooring or something of that nature. So it's not like you can just move from one industry and just move right into the other industry without any type of adjustment time. So a lot of what we're seeing going on in our employment labor force is these mismatchings kind of raising their head. We're also seeing that employers are more and more utilizing hiring software. Now, are they doing that because it's cheaper than paying an actual person to do the job? Maybe. Are they doing it because they can't find somebody to actually do the job? Maybe. But regardless, what is happening is that we are seeing employers are using more and more hiring software to filter through applications. And in this software, they have words that they look for to either help bump the person to the next level or automatically eliminate that person. The problem is that as efficient as that is, if you have a machine doing that, then you are automatically eliminating a lot of people who may not have, say, a college degree, but may have the skills that you're looking for that you actually need to fulfill the job. And if you don't have a human being looking at that, then none of that stuff's getting passed, and they're only picking it from the resumes who have passed through this software. And we touched a little bit about this on the artificial intelligence episode. And so Eric Groshin, senior economics advisor at the Cornell University, says that the use of this software is very dangerous, specifically when it comes to education. And he says, quote, "This is a real problem for the labor market because less than half of US workers have a college degree, and it's not changing rapidly." And then he goes on to further say, and yet we have many, many workers who are very productive at previous jobs who have learned a lot of skills on those jobs. End quote. And so we've talked about this in multiple episodes. We talked about the astronomical student debt that the millennial generation is carrying. We also talked in there about how people who do traditional trades, again, like floor laying, I'm getting new flooring in my house. That's why I keep thinking of this. There's a shortage of those type of people in the trades, and they're making crazy money right now. And we're seeing a shift between people going, why the fuck would I spend a whole bunch of money on a college education, like we were raised in the 80s, that that's what you do when you're successful, just to come out and not have a fucking job that pays me anything. And so people are going back to trade locations. And we're seeing another thing we're seeing is mass exodus of people leaving cities, which we've covered also on previous shows, where there has been the mass exodus because since people do not have to live in the city anymore, if they can work remotely, then they are going out into the housing market and they are buying houses away from the city. We've talked also on this show about the recent housing bubble that we're finding ourselves in. And that is changing a whole bunch of things. I was just having a conversation last week with Brennan from Ghost Story Guys podcast. If you don't listen to it or haven't checked them out, Brennan's a great guy. His podcast is fantastic. And we were talking about how the fact that people aren't commuting anymore because those who can work from home will and do, that we're seeing listenership kind of across the board in the podcast space a little bit affected because people are not sitting stationary, whether it be on public transportation or in a car, commuting to their destination. And so we see that white collar workers who have had the ability to leave the city and work remotely have started doing that, which has left a vacuum in the cities of service workers where they need service workers to fill these jobs. Now, a lot of the service worker industry, they typically do not have, not all of them have personal automobile transportation, which means that they are relying on public transportation to get into the cities. And again, depending on how your exposure risk and your comfort level is with coronavirus, a lot of people might find that not really something that they want to do or expose themselves to for a shitty paying job, quite frankly. Now, economists say that the migration that I just spoke about and the mismatch of all of this stuff is one of the reasons that after the 2008 financial crisis, which again, we've talked about that on the show as well, that a quote, a regional mismatch of labor was one of the reasons that employment was slow to recover. And so what they are saying is that there is a possibility that we will see another slow recovery in the job market with this mismatch going on, why people try to get up to speed, to learn a new trade, get into education, something of that. And quite frankly, I know that I probably speak for a lot of you out there in the fact that when we went into quarantine, it makes you reevaluate a whole bunch of shit. It made you reevaluate your spouse, where you live, who your friends are, your fucking job, because there's a lot of people that don't want to die at their fucking desk and they want to have a life, and maybe they're seeing their kids are growing up or whatever the case is, or their marriage is in the shitter and they want to save their marriage, and they put so much attention into work that they haven't had that ability. So what we've seen is we've seen a massive reevaluation of people reevaluating their lives and their current situation. So Flex Jobs did a survey of 1,800 unemployed job seekers, and they found that 48% of the respondents were frustrated because they weren't finding the right positions, or they were only finding low wage jobs. Now, you know, the old adage in the 80s would be, so what, you have to work, so work. Well, the problem with taking a low wage job is that if you have children, then you can't afford or find, which we're going to talk about here in a minute, childcare. And if you're going, yes, I'm just going to get back in the workforce so I can work, and you go to a low wage paying job, 9 times out of 10, most of your money is going to be sucked up in childcare. So why the fuck would you expend the extra gas time to get to any of these places just to work? And so a lot of that is going to come back around to financial situations of people changing. Now let's talk about inflation. Inflation has been everywhere lately. They're talking about it. The Fed's coming out and saying we're not worried about it. Then other economists are saying you should be worried about it. And everybody's having this big fucking fight. And the bottom line is that there's no clear consensus right now if inflation is actually going to increase the way it is. So we have economists weighing in saying that the shortage of labor, and I'm doing shortage of labor again, because we see that it's not a shortage of labor. We see that there's a lot of other things at work. It might be short of labor in certain sectors, but not in all sectors across the board. And so they're saying that the shortage of labor, they're fearing will feed the biggest inflation increase in 30 years. Now, average pay rose 19 cents an hour. So the average American gets paid about $30.85 an hour. This equates to about a 4.6% increase up from the 4% last year. So, you know, a 0.6% increase. And to put that in context, before we went into COVID, we were seeing a 3% increase in wages across the board. Now, but what we see is that for all of these wage wars that are going on and the higher money, again, I'm air quoting, higher money that they're giving you, that most of those wage increases are just getting eaten up in inflation, because we see that commodity prices have increased. And again, I've told you guys 100 times, I'm going to tell you again, commodities is anything that's the same no matter where you buy it. Wood, carrots, pork bellies, you know, copper. It's copper in China and copper in the United States is fucking copper. That's a commodity. We've seen that commodity prices have started to increase for a variety of different reasons, like supply chains, which we'll touch on in a minute, and climate change causing inclement weather all over the world. So we see droughts in Brazil that have came through, causing higher prices in coffee and sugar. We see that there's limited mining happening on precious metals and industrial metals. Everybody gets so hung up on gold and silver, but there's a lot of other industrial metals that are just as important that people need in order to fucking build shit. And those aren't getting mined either. We see that cotton has been hit by inclement weather and also supply chain bottlenecks. And we're going to touch on that later. And so what we're seeing that commodity prices are going up. So even though the wages are increasing, the bulk of that is getting eaten up by this extra inflation that we're experiencing. Another reason why there's a conversation that people might not be moving into the job market would be savings. So Americans, we're just not good savers. Okay. And I hope that there's people out here that's listening to this like, well, fuck you, Mel, I save a whole ton of money. Okay, well, good on you. But I'm just telling you that as Americans, we don't save that well. And so there is a consensus among economists. So we have a quote from Daniel Zhao, a senior economist at Glassdoor Inc., who has said that stimulus checks and boosted unemployment benefits and expanded social safety net programs have increased our savings rate to a record of 34% for last year. And for Americans, typically year over year, our savings rate has been anywhere between 2 and 5%. Just so you guys can understand. So the people who have not been working while they're doing a reevaluation, while they're trying to decide how comfortable they are with returning to the workforce with COVID and coronavirus running rampant, they have been stocking away money. And so what we've seen is that they have a little bit more time, that they don't have to necessarily rush back to the labor market. Now, the great generation and the older boomers are good savers. But we see as when it hits from the generation X and down, we see that our savings ratio appropriately to that generation just drops. And it is what it is. Okay. Childcare. All right. So for those of you out there who have kids, I am sure at some point or another, you have experienced a bus that didn't run, or you have experienced for whatever reason that you need to keep the kids home due to various labor shortages. And what we're seeing daycare workers are leaving the childcare sector in droves to take advantage of these wage wars that are going on in other industries. And for most childcare workers, we see that they make about $12 an hour. And we see that Dunkin' Donuts in some locations is offering $14 an hour. And we see Walmart, as we covered in episode 264 on our $15 minimum wage, is offering $15 minimum wage. So what we're seeing is the childcare space emptying out, because the people are going, okay, you pay me like shit. These kids are driving me fucking crazy. And if you got 10, 15 kids, that's 10 to 15 families who are also doing whatever they're doing to potentially bring and get you exposed to the coronavirus. And quite frankly, people are saying, fuck it, it's not worth it. The U.S. Treasury Department said in a report that childcare workers are paid on average $24,230 a year, which puts them at the bottom of 2% of all occupants. The U.S. Treasury Department went on to further state that nearly half of all childcare workers have to rely on public assistance, such as SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. Now, we also covered this again in episode number 264, when we debated on the benefits, the pros and cons of raising the federal minimum wage to $15. So go back, because that was a great fucking episode. And a lot of childcare workers, if you can work from home remotely at $15 an hour as an admin and not be exposed to the coronavirus and not be exposed to, quite frankly, children, in my opinion, why the fuck would you not do that? That sounds amazing, right? And all of this is culminating and coming about on the time when people are trying to get back in the workforce. And this is one of the things that is causing people maybe not to be able to enter it as fast. And what we find with a lot of the lower paying jobs, they don't have the flexibility that if your child's bus doesn't come for that day, that you can just go, hey boss, I need to leave this cashier because my child can't get to school. I need to go home and take my kid to school. They're just not flexible. And it's really kind of one of those yin yang things where, is this really fucking worth the time that I'm putting it, or can I spend my time in a better situation? Now, this is disappropriately affecting women. And we've touched on this in the Economics of Discrimination series that we did, which was episodes 174, 178, 182, and 183, because typically the woman The female partner is the one to give up her career to stay home with the children. And then what we see is that takes the women out of the workforce for, say, 5 to 10 years, while the kid is, to whatever age they get at. So when they go back into the workforce, they have no past recent history, and their skill level could have significantly dropped. And we've seen in the economics of discrimination episode how that ripples all the way through a woman's career when she chooses or has to stay home to raise her children. And that's why things like this are like pebbles you put in a pond. The things that are happening now, and this is why I focus so much on letting you guys know how this stuff is all connected, because the things that are going on around you ripple out through economy for years. That what we find is when we start feeling the effects of those, we have forgotten about what happened with the coronavirus and all of the things that came from that. And the wave the pebble was dropped so many years ago that when we start feeling those waves down the road, we don't connect it to, oh, it was that fucking pebble that caused it. So I'm going to briefly talk about supply chains right now, and I'm only going to remotely touch on the United Kingdom's fuel shortage. And the reason why I'm doing this is because I want to show you that they're experiencing this too. They have a fuel shortage because they do not have people available to transport the fuel. And we see that they had only 127 visa applications for the 5,000 that were offered in order to get people in to open up their supply chains. Now, we talked about this in Brexit as a potential ramification. You can go back and listen to that episode. Again, all these episodes I'm doing, these are all pebbles in the pond that ripple and ripple and ripple. And so now we're seeing one of the consequences of Brexit is the fact that all of the labor that they had access to before, they don't typically have. We had 127 applications come in for 5,000 that was offered. Now, I want to give a special mention to our power grid episode, because we talked about when Texas came off the power grid that they did not have the ability to borrow energy from other states. Go back and listen to that episode. It was also another good episode, if I do say so myself. And what we're seeing France's European Affairs Minister, Clement Beaune, and I'm sure I didn't say that right, has threatened to restrict power supplies to Britain, who is a net importer of power. And this is where we're starting to see what happens when all of these things change, whether they're political alliances, whether they're financial alliances, whether they're decisions that are made by individual states. We start seeing that they can now become a bargaining chip. And again, we covered that in the Texas deep freeze episode, as well as the US power grid episode. We touched on all those things. So if you want to go back and listen to those in specific. And it is safe to say that every industry has been affected by supply chains, but we're just going to go ahead and talk about a couple of them just so I can get you guys kind of thinking in the mode of how these supply chains are affected and what the potential consequences could be. So let's look at the book industry. All right. By the way, I have a book, Finance the Other F Word, another F word to love. Just got to put that plug in so I don't have to do it at the end of the show. Ships can't be unloaded. So books that make it to ships get to ports, and then there's nobody there to unload them. And then they sit and they sit and they sit until they can finally be unloaded. Now, for the United States, the Christmas season is a very big deal. For the retail industry pushes the economy a lot of times in stores into the black. That's why it's called Black Friday. So what you'll see stores were running in the red, and then Black Friday pushes them back into the black, which is why it's called Black Friday. So the Christmas season, specifically in America, is a big fucking deal. And if you have books that are being sent out with the hope and expectation that they are going to be used as Christmas presents, well, if they can't fucking get unloaded, that means that all of the press that's around the books has to be pushed back, or they go ahead and they move forward with the press on the books, but then nobody can find the fucking books. All right. So think PS5. Okay. PS5 was hard to find before the pandemic. There's people who've been looking for PS5s forever. And we've touched on this in another episode. They can't find that either. And so then we see that commodity prices have increased. So the price of wood, thus the price of paper has increased. And so what we see that the paper that the books are printed on is now costing more money. We also see this affecting the auto industry who needs chips for cars and different raw materials, because as we talked about a little bit earlier, industrial metals and other precious metals, quite frankly, are not being mined right now, which is causing a backup in providing the needed materials for a lot of these companies. And then once the books are offloaded from the ships, they need to be transported to a warehouse. If you're lucky enough to have a warehouse. Now, if you're an Amazon, a Barnes and Noble, you have warehouses where you can load your books. But if you're a small independent bookstore, you can't go and buy in bulk. So what a lot of the big retailers did is they said, oh shit, commodities are going up. We're going to fucking buy a whole bunch of these books and we're going to stack them in our warehouses. And then we're going to be the only ones that have the books in the event that people need them and they can't find them anywhere else and they have the room to store it. But your local bookstores, they don't have big fucking warehouses and they have limited space. And they don't often have the cash flow to load up on the books to be able to provide the books for their customers come Christmas. So what we start to see is again how just the way that the economy in general is structured, that it starts tipping towards the 1% and the larger businesses. In Argentina, we see that there's a wine shortage because they're running low on glass supplies. It has nothing to do with the grapes, has nothing to do with any of that. They just can't fucking put it in a bottle. And they're trying a whole bunch of different measures to waive certain things to try to get different glass products in the door. But these people can't export their wine because they can't fucking find glass to put it in. Now, the food supply chain is all over the place. Again, people to harvest, people to transport it. And one of the things that we talked about at the very beginning of the pandemic, when you couldn't find a fucking piece of meat or a piece of produce in the grocery store, we saw that there was farms that were mulching massive amount of produce because their model had been based on supplying restaurants. But when people can't go to the restaurants because they're on quarantine or they're afraid of catching coronavirus, their logistically was not set up to start supplying the grocery stores. And of course, produce has a limited shelf life. So what they did was they took all this produce and they mulched it, tons and tons of food. They mulched it. Now, will that happen with the supply chain crunch? I don't know. That's speculation. We've already talked about the Santa Claus rally and how big and important that the Christmas shopping season is to the American economy. Now, with commodity prices increasing, will that have an effect on it? Maybe, maybe not. There's some talk that some people have already bought their Christmas presents well in advance with the expectations of prices going up, but we'll see how the Santa Claus rally turns off or, pans out. Now, walk-offs in retail. This is where we're starting to see people just fucking be done with it. In Family Dollar, a Family Dollar in Nebraska had to briefly close because the entire staff quit because there was constant high turnover, low wages, and quite frankly, because there's no health benefits. Now, I talked about very openly in one of my episodes that when I left my last major firm, I was involved in a very lengthy 2.5, 3-year lawsuit with them. And I cover this extensively on another show. And during that time, as I was launching my own investment firm, I needed money. And I worked at the Dollar Tree and I stocked shelves in the morning. I started at 3 a.m. in the morning and I worked until 7 or 8 every morning. Then I would have to go and I would have to work my investment business. And I ended up quitting that job because I was exhausted, because the pay was absolute shit. And even though my supervisor, Colleen, who I love to death and we're still very close friends, did everything she could because she realized the pay was shit and we were working our balls off to, bring in little cereal bars and stuff like that to help us. The fact is that it fucking sucked ass. And so there's a lot of dollar stores in here where we see this is like the epitome of low wage. You got asshole clients, you got crazy hours they're expected to work, no health benefits, and you're working with again high turnover and often assholes. All right. Now, in multiple Dollar General, recently there was another Dollar General in Maine where multiple employees walked off the job after posting notes just talking about the work culture and pay. And we've seen that similar incidences have occurred in Chipotle, Hardee's, and Wendy's location around the country. People are fucking done. People are fed up. They're like, I got these assholes screaming at me and you're not paying me and I've got health benefits, but yet I have to sit here and potentially risk my health to these people. And by the way, let's just dissect that for a second. I am a dollar store employee running a cash register. I am working for shit money, which means I'm below the poverty level. I have no health benefits, and I have to deal with asshole customers who may or may not want to wear a mask, who may or may not have been infected with coronavirus. And if I get COVID, I have no fucking health insurance. Then I have to pay for that shit myself. And 9 times out of 10, the dollar store, Family Dollar, General Dollar, all those fucking places, for a damn minute, they are not going to hold your fucking job for you. So again, fucking right here, 2 fingers up. And this is what's happening. And this is where we're starting to see where the 99% at this moment in time is saying, you guys can fuck right off. Not all of them, but the ones who can are. And what I'm hoping is that this will start a revolution in how employers treat employees, but we'll see. And so with this lack of safety, people are wondering if it's even worth it. And I don't know about you, but sanitation has visibly dropped off. I remember during quarantine, when you had to go to the grocery store, they were out there spraying the shit out of all the carts, and they were soaking wet, and they were disinfecting them, and they had all this stuff. Now what they got is they got somebody with a little hand sanitizer pump and masks. And we see that there's not the disinfectant of where people would normally sit. Somebody's not running out to spray down the area. So we've seen sanitation visibly drop, but nothing else has really changed. And so when we talk about this, and I haven't said this in a minute, the Men Who Built America episode series, you got to listen to that series. A lot of you hear me talk about it and you go listen to the first one. That I need you to listen to the series so you can understand how we got to where we got. The fucking series is amazing. The series on the History Channel is amazing. Fucking watch it. If you don't want to listen to my series, that's fine. I give you a play-by-play. That thing is fucking amazing. And what we saw is that it was when employees were finally fed up. They're like, fuck you guys. We're working 12 to 14 hours a day around these machines that are polluting the fucking air. We're sweaty as balls. You're paying us like shit. And in the meantime, the disparity between the 99% and the 1% was the largest at that time that we've ever had in American history. This is why it's important to go back. And so it made me think of those things. And so then what we see is we see policies where people are saying, you can't have your phone out. You can't, be on the retail floor and have your phone out. Well, in April, there was a shooting at a FedEx hub in Indianapolis where workers were trapped inside the facility and were unable to call or text any loved ones because the policy at that FedEx hub was that all cell phones had to be put away. And so people again are going, is it worth it? I go back to Wells Fargo. I'm a banker. I'm sitting at a desk unexposed. The tellers are behind the teller line. They scream there's a fucking robbery. And then all of us and all of our clients are completely exposed. It's like, man, fuck you guys. Like, seriously, fuck you guys. And what we saw was a lot of the people were furloughed at the beginning of the pandemic. And a lot of these employers gave zero fucks about them and watched their bottom line. And now they want you to come back and, work at $10 an hour, given all of those things that we've already talked about and touched on. And so this is leading to people ghosting their jobs. They're just like, you know what? Obviously you don't give a shit about me. Fuck off. And they are ghosting their jobs. They're quitting without 2 weeks notice. And I've always given 2 weeks notice, and whether you do or do not has nothing to do with me. I'm telling you that this is what's happening, that people are getting fed up and they're saying, fuck it. You and this job is not worth it. Like, if you guys remember the old song from the 80s, take this job and shove it. Seriously, that's what's happening. And there is still a debate going on about why we should raise the $15 minimum wage, even in light of everything I just touched on. And yes, we have the Delta variant right now, but you know what? This is a virus. So that means that this thing can morph. So this is just going to keep happening. So these problems, in my opinion, I don't think are going to be going away. And I feel bad because I love and value capitalism. But at the same time, there's got to be a balance. And my hope is that what we find out of all of this is we find that with all of these circumstances and the 99% having more power, that we can start turning the table on these industries like, Walmart making $5 billion a year. I believe that was the last number I checked, while their employees are making, virtually anything, and insert Target, insert, Family Dollar, General Dollar, Dollar Tree, all of those things. So I hope that you guys enjoyed this episode. We will be back as soon as we can with Zoe, where we'll be covering some music stuff and have some tie-ins and have a little bit more banter. But I thought this was very important to get out there. Please make sure you follow us on social media at Finance is the Other F Word. Guys, rate and review us. I hate asking for this stuff, but we need it. Okay. I see the numbers. I know there's listeners out there who keep coming back. And quite frankly, we're not getting the review. So please give us a 5-star review, leave us a kind word, give us feedback, slide into our DMs on our social medias. Or you can always text us at 775-537-4352. And as always, I thank you for listening, and I am out this bitch.
Thank you for listening. Please check back for upcoming episodes and follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Finances, the Other F Word.